Mental anguish. His plan was to go to Nashville, where he would be normal for many months, and he would not kill again for a long time. But he saw in the news that the search for the boy was huge, and it only got bigger. Matthew stopped in the woods of Tennessee, but went into towns, to bars, to watch the reports. The boy's face and name were on TV every day, and he was in the papers. "You just have to sit tight, Spirit Wolf," he told himself. "Be careful." But as the days went on, the parents were on TV pleading for the return of their son. He felt their emotion. He heard the people at the bar talk about it and curse whoever could have done it. And as the search went on, some people speculated about the supernatural, aliens, even Bigfoot, and they talked about bringing in psychics to locate the boy. And some spoke of the cases of young men and women who had been found floating in water. It drove Matthew mad because he thought about his father and himself and his brothers. They were not like normal people. They said goodbye without emotion, but people did not. "We just want to know what happened to him," said the mother, and that stuck in Matthew's mind. So he stood up from his bar stool and went back to the mountain and found the boy. He threw the sticks and rocks aside, and he was amazed by what he saw. The boy was not decayed or predated by animals. He didn't even look sick. He looked asleep. He picked up the body and light walked back to where he had killed him, and on the way he pondered. He had struck the boy with great power, more than was needed. It was thoughtless power, a pointless act like kicking a stone off the road. It must have killed not just the boy, but every bacterium in his body, and that was why the body had not started to rot. It was sterile, and Matthew had struck with such force that there was still some power in it that kept microorganisms and insects at bay. It was night as he reached the site of the killing. He knew that there was only one way into that area of the park, and he went down the path slowly. He came across a tree lying across the path, and he placed the boy on the tree. There the body could not be missed, and he left. He thought it would be bad luck to go back toward Nashville, so he moved toward Atlanta. On the way, he stopped at a bar. The boy had been found. It was all he could do for the family and himself, and for a moment he was relieved. But the report was not reassuring. The lead searcher said the boy had been found on a tree on a path that search parties had used for days. "Somebody put that boy back there," he said. "It will be impossible to miss him every day." Hundreds of people use that trail every day going in and out of the park to do the search. Then the news came out about the pristine state of the corpse. Since it showed no signs of decay, they thought the boy must have been alive for 10 days before he reappeared. And the idea that he had been surviving on his own in that woods was not credible, because the whole area had been buried in search parties and helicopters that used FLIR, forward-looking infrared, which would have picked up his heat signature. There is no way that boy was in these woods. Matthew bit his knuckle as he watched that. It was a mystery, and it was also a new set of dots. Together, they would keep this boy in memory for many years, and the investigator would hear of it. "Why did I do that?" he thought. "Why couldn't I just leave him in the crevice?" There was nothing to do but lay low. And so he lived much like he did in New Orleans for a year. And once again he went back to wandering. He got a man who was hunting alone. He got 3 more people, one by one, who fell behind their group. He got one who got stuck in a storm and couldn't find his way back. He got 4 who had gone for water. He got 3 who were picking berries. They were easy because berry pickers lose track of where they are and don't pay attention. He got 3 more who were in their group but going through a boulder field. They lost sight of the group, and it was easy for him because he could hide amongst the rocks. He got 1 hitchhiker. He got 6 that had broken down. and he got even more that he couldn't remember. And then he slipped up again. Mental armor. He did it thoughtlessly, just like before. It was night when by accident he came across what he thought was a short, skinny man walking barefoot. He struck right away as an opportunity kill, but he got no energy at all. He went over and saw that it was really a boy, maybe 12 years old, tall for his age. He wasn't dead. That seemed impossible to Matthew. He had struck with full force. He almost fled, but he wanted to know why the boy had survived. He crouched down and slapped the boy's face lightly. He didn't stir, so Matthew waited. He looked around and saw no parents or anyone else. In a few minutes, the boy woke up and started to wail. It sounded like a banshee. Matthew stood back and struck him again. The boy did not die, though he was quiet once more, and Matthew light-walked him to a mountain he could see through the fog of a gathering rainstorm. He went up to a high ledge and set the boy down. Soon the boy was up and he started wailing again. He curled up and put his hands over his ears. "Who are you?" said Matthew. But the boy didn't even acknowledge him. He kept howling and saying "Mom" over and over. Matthew tried to pull his hands from his ears, but the boy held onto his head all the harder and kicked at him fiercely. Matthew moved away, and after a while the boy was quiet. He tried to speak to him, to learn his name, but the boy did not respond. It started to drizzle, and Matthew moved the boy to a spot on the ledge that was protected. This started off a new wave of wailing until the boy was finally quiet again and sat rocking back and forth. The boy wouldn't make it if he left him there. If he kept lying there, the rain would soak him eventually, and he would die of hypothermia. If he tried to find a path without his shoes, he would slip. And if he didn't slip, his feet would get cut and he wouldn't be able to move fast, and the cold would get him anyway. Matthew thought of the family of the other boy. He scolded himself. "You're a hunter. You don't care about your prey." Yet he did. And this boy was not just another victim. He had been impervious to his power. Was his mind different? Was he bewildered, like the cows? If he helped, he was sure the boy would not be able to give a description of him. He had not looked at Matthew, and even if he had, Matthew did not think he would have been able to register anything about him. And so he took a chance. The penetrating gaze. He light-walked to where he had taken the boy, and there were already people out searching for him. It was early morning and still dark. They were working methodically, and flashlight beams danced frenetically through the cold rain. But there were not many of them, and they gathered for a moment and then divided themselves into small groups and separated. One group went over a field into a stand of trees. There it was pitch dark, and Matthew light-walked right past one of them, just touching his arm. The man stopped and shined his light around, calling to his friends. They called back, and Matthew heard him say, "I don't know, something touched me." Matthew was some distance away, and he made a high-pitched wail, something like a wolf, something like a screaming spirit, and something like the boy. The men started toward him. Then, after about 50 yards, they stopped. Matthew screeched again, and they moved toward him again. The sky was brightening slightly under steely clouds. On the other side of the trees emerged the mountain where the boy was. The first man said, "Stop." There were 2 broken saplings lying down, pointing in the direction of the mountain. Matthew, from across another field, wailed again, and followed. They found another broken sapling, and they all stopped and looked at each other, and all around themselves with wide eyes. The noise of the forest stopped. Even the rain made no noise. One of the men caught Matthew's eyes through the leaves. Matthew stared at him with a dark, penetrating gaze. It was as if his eyes turned black. The man both saw him and didn't see him at the same time. "I got a hunch," said the man. "What?" said one of the other men. "Up there." He pointed at the mountain. "All that way?" said another. "I got a feeling about it. I'm going there. You with me?" "That's crazy. He didn't even have shoes." "Well, I'm going anyway. I got a feeling. You can join me if you want." The other two looked at each other and then followed, speaking into their walkie-talkies. Matthew went back to the ledge. It looked like the boy hadn't moved at all. He was shivering, however, and quiet. His skin was white and his lips blue. Matthew knelt down and then focused on his own energy. Matthew thought the knowledge of giving energy would manifest itself someday when he had a son. But now, even though he did not know the boy, the knowledge summoned itself. He pulled energy toward his heart, and then he held one hand on the boy's forehead, and the energy flowed. The boy stopped shivering and then rolled over to lie facing the wall of the ledge in a fetal position. He leaned to the boy's ear and said, "Wait here. They're coming." He watched for a few minutes, and the boy fell asleep. A watch, but it is not time. 3 months later, Matthew was in a bar watching a news report of a man who had disappeared on a hiking trail in winter right nearby. He had turned back as his friends went to the summit, but when they returned, there was no one at their campsite. They went back to search and found nothing. The strange thing was, though it was winter and there was snow on the ground, there were no footprints going into the forest. But there were also no other ways to leave the path, and there were a lot of people traveling that path. There was no logical way he could have disappeared. And so the search had begun, and after days, nothing had been found. Not footprints off trail, though it was almost impossible to climb out of the valley where the trail was, especially for a man who had been feeling ill. They found no equipment or anything else to indicate his presence, including signs of predation. They got helicopters with FLIR and still found nothing. They brought in dogs, who also found nothing. It amazed everyone, including Matthew, but for a different reason. He knew that a brother must have been nearby, and may be nearby still. He might have left a clue. When the searchers finally left, he light-walked all around the area and also found no sign of the man, so he finally sat down in the snow on a hidden ledge above the path and wondered, where would I have put the body? He made several attempts to reenact the incident. He would meditate in the snow for a while, imagining a scenario where he struck the man and immediately light-walked him away so as to avoid being seen by other hikers. Then he would pretend to be in haste and needed to find a hidden place fast. He would hurry off to find a deep crack in a mountain, or a ledge that was nearly impossible to reach, or a stream or a pond, and if he found nothing, he would go back and start again. He did this for days. Finally, he came across a crevice 12 miles away in the side of a mountain. It was hard to see from the trail, and if one climbed to it, there was nowhere else to go. You couldn't climb higher or to the left or right, so it was a dead end and not an attractive place to go as a hiker or rock climber. There was not even a good view because another ridge in the narrow valley blocked any line of sight. And there he found bones. By the descriptions he had read, the clothing matched the man who had been missing. Spirit Wolf weighed the bones in his hands, trying to feel any energy, and there was none, not even the whisper of the dead. He found a watch, and it had a date, the man's wedding date. There was an engraving that read, "From Charlie, your best man." He picked up the skull and looked into its eye sockets. Had these sockets beheld one of his brothers? There was a stone inside the skull, and when he took it out, he saw words scraped on it. "Do not follow, Spirit Wolf." He put the skull down and left the place, carrying the stone in his pocket. He hurled the watch as far from the cliffside as he could. One day, someone would find it. Crocus. Now he went to New York to get an office job that involved technology. He had no use of it, but people did. He got a job at a computer repair store by staring into the boss's eyes and conquering his mind. He could offer no skills. He would learn, and when he had learned enough, he would abandon the store. He lived as he had before, and in New York it was easier than ever to cover his tracks. There were almost too many people. But with that, he found too many dark spirits as well. Even ones that had the right walk would produce a stench rather than a spirit, and he let it float and stagger away. He was there for 2 years and took 11 victims. One day, after the 8th victim, a girl came in with a broken screen and looked at Matthew. It was a cold and vicious look, like that of a fisher cat. She had black hair and blue eyes. Her skin was so white he could see her blue veins and red capillaries. She wore flaming red lipstick. "You're good," said Matthew. She scowled at him. "What kind of a thing is that to say? What it means? Are you hitting on me? I'm asking you out." "Fix my phone," she said. "It will take 1 hour." She left. She came back 2 hours later. "Here," he said. "It was easy. The charge is $25. "I thought you were asking me out." "I was." "Then drop the charge." "I will not, but I will be at Balthazar at 8. She grabbed the phone and left. Matthew laughed. He had never spoken to a girl like that. It would be the strangest way he had ever gotten a date, at least if she was there. But it comforted him. If she was there, she would have passed some kind of test. Exactly what, he did not know, but it seemed fitting. She felt different, somehow uncompromising and honest in the most flat and impassive way, yet possessing the latent energy of a volcano under the gray shale of her demeanor. She had neither the desire to impress nor to be impressed. Matthew waited for an hour before she sat down across from him. "I've been telling the waiter to wait," he said. "For a monster, you sure have no game." "What makes me a monster?" he said. Matthew's heart was really pounding. He was on well uncharted territory with her. "Let's drop the existential dialogue," she said. "No one's taking notes." He didn't think they were having an existential dialogue. He was just trying to keep his head above water. "How was your day?" he said. She laughed, and from there they suddenly had an easy conversation. It was not a normal one, not to Matthew, but it was not hard, and she was not frosty. "I only do stuff like I did at the store to scare people away," she said at one point. "To me, bad people are weak-willed, and you burst through my facade." She worked as an analyst at Morgan Stanley and wanted to move up the ranks. She said she wanted money and power, but he didn't think it was true. He thought she really wanted truth. She wanted a higher position so she could get a look behind the scenes of the world, and that set him at ease. If that's all she wanted, he'd be able to deliver. She talked about nature, but she was not exactly a nature lover like some of his other girlfriends, the kind who like to bring nature into their homes in the form of houseplants or framed feathers, but detest going out into it. The kind who believe that the ancient and indifferent crystals will bestow powers on them if they confine them to their apartments. She loved nature for the totality of itself, on its own terms, and that included its self-interest and lack of pity. To her, beaches were a very pretty battleground of death and starvation. Even so, she made him forget to think of the world as an endless march through a gray wasteland. With her, it was also a joyful, aimless frolic through a world of color and light. Her spirit had the ballast of 1,000 iron suns and the brightness of a quasar. And her name was not Crocus. Her name was Astrid. "Why do you call yourself Crocus?" "It is my real name," she said, "the one that describes me." "I am Spirit Wolf," he said. They stared into each other's eyes for 1,000 centuries. That night, each one individually knew they were meant for each other, but for the sake of prudence, they didn't say so out loud, and they dated for weeks and months and 2 years and 5. Time didn't matter to them. Each day together was like the first time they had met, as deep, brooding, and quiet as it was frivolous, insouciant, and loud. But Matthew also saw that the grip of time was tightening around her. He knew that years would overtake her like a tide, and she would die. Violence would one day overtake him, but probably not before he had heard her speak her last words from a wizened countenance. He thought about the many stories from mythology of demigods who go through wife after wife or husband after husband, but he found no solace in them, only desperation. He'd been through many girlfriends that he could not even remember, but she was not like them. He was in love with Crocus, and he would mourn her forever. And if he fell in love again after that, that story would just be another in an ever-expanding set of circles, stretching into misery, until his life was nothing but a crushing mountain of nostalgia and the desire to take a few steps back to her story. He thought of his father when he learned Spirit Grower was dead. If they were to live in bliss, even for a time, to have a family, he would have to take measures. Matthew asked her to come with him to the Rockies for a vacation. "You can see the places I grew up. You can see the chimney where I hid from the men." "That story isn't true, Matthew. You made that up. It's too long ago to be true." "You'll see."